king, he ruled over a kingdom created by another, a man born only a few miles from where I'm standing right now, a visionary whose strength and wisdom gave rise to the phenomenon called NASCAR, William Henry Getty France. We at ESPN and ABC are proud to have played a part by bringing the excitement of NASCAR racing into your homes. Today and through the years, NASCAR heroes have been identified by number almost as much as by name. It could be the 43 of the King, or the 3 of Dale Earnhardt, or even the 22 of NASCAR's first champion, Red Byron. And now, as part of our ongoing commitment to you, the fans, it is our special privilege to invite you to join us as we present the 50, a celebration of the first half-century of NASCAR's glory.
There was a job that needed to be done, and without hesitation, he would do it. On this day, under a blazing Florida sun, the giant at the microphone held an audience of thousands of race fans captivated by a very unorthodox prayer. He thanked God for the competitors, the mechanics, the House and the Senate, and the local weather. And then he asked for all manner of heavenly blessings upon the ticket takers, the souvenir sellers, hot dog vendors, and all citizens abroad. All in sharp contrast to the usual pre-race invocations of the Reverend Hal Marchman, who guaranteed the whole cornucopia of divine bounty in 45 seconds or less. But there was a problem. The Reverend Marchman was not there. He was stuck in traffic.
And when I got there, everybody was laughing, said, Bill did a great job, and they were laughing. So Andy B told me about it, said, you know, Bill closed his prayer with sincerely yours, amen. He prayed a long prayer. Thank God for everything that was and wasn't. And then he finally said, yours truly, Bill France. And he walked in the office and said, Andy B, what you supposed to say when you end a prayer? She said, amen. He said, damn, I couldn't think of it.
A writer once called him 6 feet 5 inches of the most honest and decent man anyone could find in this topsy-turvy world today. His admirers proclaimed him a visionary and the most ambitious promoter since Barnum. His detractors in the sport he loved said he was a union buster, more concerned with spectacle than safety. On one thing they could all agree: everywhere he went, he inspired respect. Washington, D.C., 1909. Robust Teddy Roosevelt is out, rotund William Taft is in. Against the backdrop of a kinder, more complacent Capitol Hill, a new citizen arrived that September. Christened William Henry Getty France, his parents hoped his second middle name would someday bring him wealth. 16 years later, that magic didn't seem very potent. He had quit high school to work as a runner in his uncle's bank, and he demonstrated a talent for anything mechanical. In the mid-20s, new racetracks were sprouting up all along the eastern seaboard with names worthy of Courier 9s like Seagrove Lanes, Mount Holly, Tops Field, Strawberry Hill. Most popular were the board tracks.
They'd come in with a big old truck and a bunch of boards and things and build a little board track, you know, out of in like 2 hours, and we'd race on them. in Salem, New Hampshire, where I was raised, had a racetrack there, 2.5-mile racetrack, all boards.
One track was in Laurel, Maryland, built from 5 million feet of Georgia pine. Unfortunately, the track splintered so often under the stress of the cars, it earned the nickname Toothpick Palace. Its 48-degree bank turns were a favorite challenge to teenage Bill France, who could never figure out a way to keep the family Model T from slipping down the track. His father never knew where Bill took the car on weekends, but could frequently be seen down at the local dealer complaining that its tires wore out too fast. I wanted to be a race driver, he said, but then everybody I knew wanted to be a race driver.
In those days, one of the big problems in auto racing was the unscrupulous promoter who would get a roll of tickets and some posters and put some posters in barbershop windows and on telegraph poles and have an auto race at the local fairgrounds track. And then by the time the second heat was in progress, he would leave with the money and there'd be no prize money paid.
After a race in Maryland, France angrily demanded to know why it only received $10 for a third-place finish when the purse was $500. The promoter admitted he had lied. It was a day Bill France would never forget. By 1933, the country was firmly in the grip of the Great Depression. Average manufacturing wages were down 60%. In an era of no disposable income, 2 areas of discretionary spending thrived: motion pictures and auto racing. In Washington, Bill France had married Ann Bledsoe. As family responsibilities grew with the birth of their first son, France made a fateful determination that the Washington winters were too harsh. A better life for his young family might be found in Florida.
I got myself a job in summertime up there, working at a service station and so forth. So then in the wintertime, well, it was snow, and we'd have a lot of work to do on automobiles in the cold, snowy winter. And so I decided if I was going to work on automobiles the rest of my life, I'd come down to Florida.
The 50 is brought to you by 76 NASCAR High Performance Motor Oil. Works for NASCAR, works for your car. By your select GM Goodwrench Service Plus dealers. The plus means better. And by Coca-Cola Classic. Always the real thing. Always Coca-Cola.
In 1898, the first official sale of an American automobile was ironically made to a man with the name of Bob Allison. From then on, America's love affair with the horseless carriage has best been expressed by a single phrase: how fast does it go? Daytona Beach was the place everyone went to find out. On March 7th, 1935, the fire siren on the corner of South Beach and Orange Avenue wailed. It was a signal everyone in town knew.
When the school would know that the race was going on, they'd turn the siren on, and which meant that a time trial was going to be. And we listened for that siren to go off. And whether we'd get out of school, the principal would let us out, we would just take off, period. And we'd get down to the trials, and we would just sit in those sand dunes and just wait until we'd hear the roar of those engines of Sir Malcolm Campbell.
Sir Malcolm Campbell was a flamboyant Englishman whose principal occupation consisted of beating his arch rival, Henry Seagrave, anywhere there was a surface to run. He considered the sands at Daytona treacherous because a 3-inch sand ridge launched his car, named the Bluebird, 100 feet in the air. But he always returned. Campbell shattered the 300-mile-an-hour barrier on his first run. The official record, however, was the average of 2 attempts. A strong headwind on his return brought his total speed down. 300 is doable, he told reporters, but never again at Daytona. Bonneville, he declared, was the new battleground. Politicians held their breath. Annual speed tournaments have been a staple of the town's economy since 1905. Daytona Beach had an item in the annual budget specifically for the likes of Campbell, Seagrave, and the legendary Barney Oldfield. And now, as they stood in the dunes and watched the Bluebird disappear down the beach, They were convinced they were seeing the end of an era.
Daytona had had a history of motorsports behind it, and they wanted to keep it going. So they developed a course on the beach using a frontage road called, it's now A1A, Atlantic Avenue, and they'd go down the highway and through a turn, through the sand dunes, up the beach and through another turn. Made an oval out of it.
The 1936 event that the City Fathers put on was a disaster. Cars quickly became trapped in sand before the high tide came in and mercifully ended the race 50 miles from its scheduled finish. The city lost $22,000 at a time when the average wage was $14 a week. Enter Charlie Reese, proprietor of the High Hat Club on Seabreeze Boulevard. Charlie had money, lots of it. And Charlie had a friend who knew all the racers.
So Charlie was interested in keeping racing here and asked me if I knew how to put the race on. I said, yeah, I think I could run the race, but I don't have no dough. He said, well, I'll bankroll it and we'll go partners. So that's the way I got in the race promoting business.
France and Reese immediately got the local community involved. Lap leaders for their inaugural race got a bottle of rum, $2.50 credit at a local men's store, a box of cigars, a case of motor oil, 2 cases of beer, a $25 credit on any automobile in Dick Rose's used car lot, and a pair of sunglasses. To guarantee there would be more finishers, Big Bill shortened the race and ordered clay to be mixed with sand in the turns. If the beach course was to succeed, it would have to be run the Bill France way. And it was. Even after the race was over, Smokey Purser, a local bar owner, won, but was seen immediately driving off the beach. He was tracked down at a gas station trying to remove special high-altitude cylinder heads and was disqualified. But racing at Daytona had risen from the ashes, never to leave again. Then 1941, Pearl Harbor. Bill France built sub-chasers for the Navy at a Daytona boatyard. And with an entire world at war, a 1.5-mile stretch of white sand beach seemed very small indeed.
This is a raid on a moonshine still operating in the southern part of the United States. Among the duties of the investigators of the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax Division of the Internal Revenue Service is the ferreting out and the destruction of this type of lawless operation.
It is 500 miles from the sands of Daytona Beach to the Carolina Hill Country. Less if you take the back roads and drive hard. In the late 40s, there were many back roads to be traveled, and it's where the raw mechanical and driving skills would be honed to make NASCAR's first champions, especially if the ATF was on your tail. The Devil's Brew was alive and well on the Blue Ridge and fermenting in the trunk of a Ford.
I grew up in Wilkes County, which was named the moonshine capital of the world. And there's no doubt that it was, because most of the people in Wilkes County are of Scotch-Irish descent. And they brought the knowledge of how to make whiskey from Europe with them. And trust me, there was nothing to do in the mountains of North Carolina back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. There was nothing to do. So you either worked at a hosiery mill, a furniture factory, or you made whiskey. And a lot of folks did it. My best recollection of the moonshine is Saturday afternoon in North Wilkesboro. And people cruising the streets. And on Saturday, the traffic on Main Street in North Wilkesboro was bumper to bumper. And honest to God, it seemed like that 40% of the cars were 1940 Fords, covered in red clay mud, and the back end jacked up in the air about a foot. But if you saw that same vehicle, if you checked the license plate on that vehicle, and you saw it on Saturday night, the back end, it was sitting level.
Since 1746, John Barleycorn had been as sure a fixture in Appalachia as corn shuck dolls and skinny dipping. By the Depression, he was downright indispensable. Farm work earned a meager 10 cents an hour. It was make moonshine or starve. Junior Johnson's parents were so broke, they once refused a COD shipment of seeds because they could not afford 35 cents for it.
We ran dirt basically everywhere we went to stay off the main highways to keep from running into highway patrolmen and stuff like that. And it was a natural for us when we showed up to the racetrack. We'd done been to school. We had all the knowledge of what it took to handle a race car on dirt. It was a training ground for many of the guys that I know that came along and did well in the sport.
The war years only made matters worse or better, depending on your perception of progress.
World War II got hundreds of thousands of men and boys out of the South and off the farms and out of the textile mills for the first time in their life. They found out it was a bigger world out there.
Returning servicemen who found their home states too sedentary headed north, many to Detroit, where pent-up demand of a car-hungry public promised manufacturing jobs galore. Those that chose to stay in the South found an economy more anemic than the one they had left to protect. There were those who ran moonshine. There were those who gave chase. And then there was Red Vogt.
Red owned a garage, a repair garage in Atlanta, Georgia. And at one end of the garage, he'd be building cars for the moonshiners. At the other end of the garage, he'd be building cars for the revenuers. And one day I asked Red, I said, who got the best cars? He said, the moonshiners paid cash, and I had to send the bills to Washington for the revenuers. Figure it out.
One ATF agent said that cars with hot engines, heavy springs, and jacked up rear ends were like noses. Everybody had one, and there's only one way to find out whose car was best.
Racetracks began to spring up all around here in North Carolina, any direction you wanted to go.
I've always said the most dangerous thing in racing is a race fan with grading equipment, because he'll build a track, and that's how they were built.
Challenge races in farm fields gave way to loosely sanctioned events everywhere from fairgrounds to athletic stadiums. While the rum runners were the fastest, the races were open to anyone who could field a car. Driving it was another matter. Jim Foster remembers the 1940 Ford he and his friend entered at the Greensboro Fairgrounds.
One of our buddies who was a hot rodder was going to drive it, and he got out and kept practicing, and we kept telling him to go faster, and we finally says, the car will run faster than that, put your foot in it. And he went back out, and we looked down the backstretch, and he was going end over end, and he came in, he said, was that fast enough? And of course it totaled the car, and my days as a car owner ended abruptly.
You had some real wild and woolly guys driving race cars, and equally some wild and woolly guys owning them. And it was pretty much unorganized mayhem when you went to the track.
Meanwhile, Bill France was not letting go of the idea of promoting. He returned to Florida after the war. Charlie Reese didn't survive the war years, and Bill turned to the most trusted manager he knew, his wife Ann, who kept the books, as well as running a household that now included a second son, Jim.
Dad was maybe a little bit more of a risk taker than Mom, but you know, once something's decided, everybody gets behind it 100%, and she's the one that kind of made sure all the bills got paid and made every dollar go as far as they could, and the cash management during that period was as important as anything else that we had going on. That was somewhat the difference between success and failure, was how well that was done, and she did a successful job of it.
Bill and Ann were promoting races under the banner of the National Championship Stock Car Circuit, but it was national in name only. The moonshiners were not used to rules, but France had bigger ideas about how the sport should be organized.
I believe it was in Daytona about 1946, and on the beach course. I went down on my motorcycle to watch the race with the motorcycles, and I pulled into this garage, to borrow a wrench to tighten the chain on the motorcycle, and this big, tall individual comes out of the station, and it happened to be Bill France. That was our first meeting, and that was the beginning of it.
His name was Francisco Eduardo Menendez, an occasional competitor in NCSCC events. Irish mother, Spanish father. And when he decided his name would be too difficult for local press to handle, he changed it to Frank Friday. Well, that was a bit too corny for his wife. He picked another day of the week and changed it to Frank Monday. And while he traveled to circuits in the north, he picked up a Confederate nickname to further confuse the issue. In December 1947, when Rebel Monday walked into the Ebony Bar atop the Streamline Hotel in Daytona Beach, he saw a lot of faces he recognized.
Well, there was about, in numbers, I'm not exactly sure how many, roughly around 30, but they were drivers, owners, promoters, mechanics, a cross-section of racing, and we spent 3 days at the Streamline Hotel from morning till night, and we made up the rules, made up the logo, which was Sir Malcolm Campbell's car in Daytona on the beach. It set the world's land speed record, and we elected Bill France president.
Big Bill offered to name the new organizing body the Stock Car Racing Society. However, the idea was quickly abandoned when the committee realized its initials spelled SCARS. Ultimately, Red Vote's suggestion of the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, NASCAR, was adopted, and the organization was ready for its first season of competition for drivers and car owners.
Well, in 1948, Red Byron won the modified championship. In 1949, he won NASCAR championship, the first NASCAR championship. So it was quite natural. I was really happy and glad that I'd be able to do that before I quit.
While Red Byron won the first 2 NASCAR championships, it was in 2 distinctive divisions, modifieds in 1948, and France's new concept of racing, strictly stock cars, in 1949. France believed that racing new stock cars off the showroom floor would give spectators vehicles they could readily identify with and help build his fan base. On June 19th, 1949, on a rough 3/4-mile dirt track in Charlotte, North Carolina, the first NASCAR strictly stock car race was held before a larger than anticipated crowd. The strict NASCAR rules were put to the test immediately. Glenn Dunaway of Gastonia, North Carolina, was originally given the checkered flag as a winner of the event, only to be disqualified for illegal springs following NASCAR post-race inspection, giving the victory to Jim Roper of Great Bend, Kansas. Dunaway's car owner, Hubert Westmoreland, protested the decision, filing a lawsuit of $10,000 in damages against NASCAR. Judge John J. Hayes threw the case out of his Greensboro court, reinforcing France's authority to make and enforce rules, effectively making Bill France the czar of stock car racing. The work the organizing committee performed 18 months earlier at the Streamline Hotel was already making its mark in the annals of motorsports history.
I think he wanted a record of it, and in fact, one of the times of the picture being taken, the photographer didn't have anyone to hold a flash bulb, and I held it, and naturally I wasn't in that picture, and that wasn't the smartest thing I ever did.
Back in Daytona, the original beach course had been abandoned due to overcrowding, and a new 4-mile course was created utilizing the beach as well as Florida Highway A1A in the Ponce Inlet area. City officials were concerned about the unwieldy nature of the events and listed their concerns: pedestrian safety, brush fires caused by carelessly tossed cigarettes, and driver safety. For crowd control, France came up with an ingenious way to make sure the ticket sellers weren't bypassed.
There was 2 miles of palmetto bushes, and you couldn't fence it in. So in order to keep people out and trying to sneak in, he posted signs about every 200 feet along and said, "Danger, snakes in this area." And so people would see those signs, and they didn't know whether to believe them or not. So most of them tried other means. They'd try to come in off the beach or come in various ways, but he kept people out pretty well by those snake signs.
The competition on the beach was legendary, with the challenge of competing on the combination of sand and asphalt undaunting to the early heroes of the sport.
I was going down that beach running 140 miles an hour, and I started hitting the seagulls. Man, they hit the windshield, and the feathers and the guts will stick to the windshield and covered my windshield. Looked in the mirror, and honest to goodness, it looked like it was snowing at Daytona Beach, and I couldn't do nothing because here's 40 or 50 cars chasing me down into the north turn. And the only thing we could do after going through the north turn in low gear, I could reach out with a rag and try to get some of these feathers off, and they would dry, you know, in the wind. But the next lap, the second lap going down that same beach, I think every seagull was out over the ocean. They were cleared out. Can you imagine a seagull sitting there? Here comes a big white monster, 140 miles an hour. Ooh. It's awesome.
Mama didn't lie. She didn't lie. Mama.
Louise Smith was one of the few successful women drivers of the era. Her husband thought she had taken his new car on vacation.
My husband had just come home from World War II, and it was hard to buy a car back in those days. And he had some dealers over at Easley, his friends, and they had sold him a new Ford, 46 Ford. And he thought he didn't know nothing about me racing. I went to Daytona. He thought on vacation, and I wrecked the car. We left it in Augusta coming back to get it fixed up. And I got home. He said, "Where's the car?" I said, "That old thing wasn't no good. You bought a lemon." I said, "I had to leave it in Augusta, get it fixed, and ride the bus home." And he brought out that newspaper and the whole section with pictures and all. Louis Smith wrecks at Daytona. And some of the news reporters asked me, said, "What'd you say then?" I said, "I didn't say nothing. I left there. I thought he was going to kill me."
Always a fan favorite, Ned Jarrett found himself in the arms of a stranger after coming off an unexpected dip in the ocean.
About halfway through the race, I was going up the beach at about 100 miles an hour, and all of a sudden something hit me in the back, and that thing spun, dug into the sand, and started flipping. And I know that it was one of those modified cars, came along running 30 or 40 miles an hour faster than I was, and didn't see me until he got to me and hit me. Anyway, that thing, it flipped and it flipped and it flipped, and finally it landed in the ocean on its wheels. And apparently it had knocked me out. And I came to enough that I thought that I needed to get to the other side of the racetrack. I knew that it was out in the ocean. And so I ran across the racetrack, and they hadn't stopped the race because I was out of the way. I was out in the ocean. And broke loose from him, ran across the track, and those cars coming up through there, and only by the graces of God did I get across there. And I was told that I got to that twine string and passed out, collapsed right there on it. Well, the next thing I remembered, I was laying in some big fat lady's arms, and she had about that much and a pint of early times liquor, and she was trying to get me to drink it. And I was bleeding, and I was pretty sure I was going to die, and I knew I wouldn't have no chance getting in heaven with that liquor on my breath.
At the turn of the century, Alexander Winton sold James Packard a new car which broke down upon delivery. When the buyer suggested how his product might be improved, Winton, an irascible Scotsman, replied, Packard thought he could build a better car, he should try it. And Packard did, and would have had a landmark place in automotive history had not one Henry Ford, passed over as a mechanic in Winton's factory, decided he could do better than both those guys. And so began the game of one-upmanship known as corporate survival in Detroit.
And I'm not afraid to place this car in the hands of the public with the full confidence that it will outperform and outlast any car in its price class. It's got that good old Dodge dependability, plus everything that the public want today. Fred, you're proud of this car, aren't you? You're damn right I am.
In the early 1950s, NASCAR was a Southern phenomenon and strictly stuck to the letter of the NASCAR rulebook. 1950 national champion Bill Rexford raced with masking tape across the front of his Oldsmobile so he could sell it later as a used car.
I remember I was scoring Bob Flock one year, and the car had been lettered with chalk. Well, there was a rain delay, and it was the only car out there that had nothing on it. So it was easy to find because there was no lettering, no numbering, no nothing on it.
One car that certainly wasn't hard to find was the fabulous Hudson Hornet of Marshall Teague.
Well, his brother designed that name, the fabulous Hudson Hornet. Yeah, Tommy was a sign painter, and he thought up that name there. So it's just for this particular automobile. That's how you identify the big green car out there.
Following Teague's win on the beach in 1951, Big Bill was on the phone to Detroit with the fabulous news.
And he said, we had a stock car race yesterday, and Marshall Teague won. And I said, well, gee, that's nice. And I hung up, and it didn't do anything about it for 4 or 5 days. And he called me back, and he said, what's the matter with you? Aren't you going to do anything about Marshall Teague? He won the race. Don't you remember that? And I said, yeah, I remember that, but I don't think it's very important to us. We don't build race cars. We build automobiles. And he said, well, it's a damn good one, and you better get busy.
France's call to Detroit did the trick, and Teague was invited to a meeting with Hudson officials. The doors to factory-backed racing were opening wider.
Stock car racing is recognized as the greatest public proving ground in the world. It is a contest that brings together cars that can be bought from any dealer, not highly specialized racing creations that are useful for no other purpose. Hudson's success in stock car competition was not achieved because they were the fastest cars entered, but because of their fast acceleration and safe cornering qualities.
Bill France moved quickly. It was time to stage a race in Detroit's backyard with the Motor City 250 at the Michigan State Fairgrounds. Tommy Thompson was the winner, but perhaps NASCAR had the biggest win.
It was the first look at Southern-style stock car racing in the heart of the Motor City. That racetrack had held for many years Indianapolis car races. So that was Bill France's real imperialistic move out of the Southeast. That was the first big step towards establishing NASCAR as a national sanctioning body.
Throughout the 50-year history of NASCAR, the pride of the marquee has been the connection between the cars driven by fans to the track with the cars that compete on the track. From the fabulous Hudson Hornet of Teague and Herb Thomas, to the classic 57 Chevy of Fireball Roberts, to the 60s Ford domination of Lorenzen and Holman Moody, to the sensational 67 season that made Richard Petty the king and made the Plymouth Hemi a household word with the greatest season in NASCAR history. Junior Johnson and Cale Yarborough brought back the glory to GM with consecutive championships in the 70s, while David Pearson and the Wood brothers made their number 21 Mercury the most dominating car in superspeedway history. And Dale Earnhardt continues to bring pride to the Chevrolet bow tie with the Monte Carlo's incredible success. The partnership with NASCAR in Detroit has flourished since that fateful follow-up phone call from France to Tom Rhodes. In the mid-1950s, it seemed there was truly a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage or carport. As a society, we were looking for new places to spend our entertainment dollars. The American people were doers, not viewers. Pins were flying, airplane spins and full Nelsons were common on the tube, and rock and roll and Disneyland were here to stay. America's post-war love affair with the automobile was even more intense, and Bill France's NASCAR circuit was thriving. NASCAR had become the best entertainment value in the South.
In the South, particularly the rural South in the 40s and 50s, there were no professional sports except minor league baseball teams. And there was one tavern after another, and that was Saturday night. A few people would go down and watch haircuts, but basically that was it. And here came the stock cars to the local fairgrounds, and it took off like wildfire.
If you wanted to drive a stock car, there was little doubt that you wanted to race in NASCAR.
The first race that I ever drove in was a NASCAR sanctioned event. And so you had to join NASCAR. And the Hickory Speedway from day one was NASCAR sanctioned. And I'm sure that if I had started on a racetrack that would not have been NASCAR sanctioned, I don't think that I would have ever developed a career in racing.
One of NASCAR's strengths has been its connection with the American pop culture. As evidenced in the 90s, the hottest sellers for Detroit are light trucks that have proven popular with the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. In the 50s, convertibles were the rage, and NASCAR followed suit. The fans enjoyed the ability to look into the cockpits of the cars and watch their heroes at work. Going to NASCAR races in those days made a lasting impression. Anticipation for the weekend's coming events kept many young minds preoccupied.
The excitement of thinking about going there. I'm going to go to the Old Charlotte Speedway on Sunday afternoon, and it's Wednesday, and I'm in school, and I start drawing pictures of cars on the Fat Boy notebook paper, you know, and as you get closer to race time, I get really excited to the point where I either wouldn't eat anything or I eat everything in the house.
I love the noise. Man, those six-cylinder engines, those flat sixes back in those days, they made such a beautiful sound. And to hear them go around a racetrack and just, you know, GC Spencer sideways, throwing dirt all up in the grandstand. It was exciting to watch, and as a kid, it just left a huge impression on me. And I knew, I don't know how, but I knew that's what I wanted to do.
In early 1957, people were enjoying the sport, and things couldn't go fast enough on the track or, unfortunately, on the road. There was a growing concern by the American Manufacturers Association that the automakers were overemphasizing the brute horsepower of their high-performance cars. Record-breaking numbers of crashes were occurring on American highways, and NASCAR made the decision to disallow the use of fuel injection in their stock car events and tried to promote the on-track safety and reliability that racing was providing. Following a tragic accident in Le Mans in 1955, fan safety was also a growing issue. A Mercedes-Benz crashed into a spectator area, causing multiple fatalities. At Martinsville, Virginia, 2 years later, a car driven by Billy Myers crashed into an area supposedly off-limits to spectators, seriously injuring 5 people. A decision to pull out of the sport by the manufacturers was made. But Bill France once again mandated the promoters to improve safety conditions for fans. He was also steadfast with the manufacturers that racing was needed to test their automobiles in supervised off-highway areas. All the while, France's vision for the ultimate proving ground for stock cars was ready to turn from dream to reality. If Yankee Stadium is the house that Ruth built, then the Daytona International Speedway is the stock car mecca that was built by the sheer will of William Henry Getty France. Indianapolis had been hosting the world for nearly 50 years, and Darlington was already a Southern legend since opening in 1950. But Big Bill's vision was bigger, steeper, and faster.
How's the track? Very fast, fast. Was there anything left on it from that first lap accident?
No, we didn't see nothing except the car. Everything else was off.
I see. Well, better luck next time, Richard Petty. Back to you, Bill Fleming.
By 1957, the need to move racing off the beach had reached a crisis stage. But 1957 was no year to go looking to raise a buck. Big money reached the papers, and the papers were screaming that NASCAR was dead, killed by the manufacturer's pullout. Unfazed, Bill France had his eye on one particular piece of property.
We kept running them there until the community was growing. And there's so many people that live down on the beach now that it would be very difficult to try and conduct anything on the beach. So back in the late 30s, early 40s, well, I pointed out to some of the city fathers that what we really needed here was if they wanted to keep motorsports as a function for this in the city area was to have a big permanent facility.
The city acquired the land from the county for $1 and then turned around and leased it to Bill France with the promise that he would have to pay taxes only on improvements he would make to the land. Popular legend is that Big Bill copied the design for the track from a Lazy Susan at a banquet table, but the inspiration for the new superspeedway was more deeply rooted than that. Everything he knew went into its design. He took the idea of its high banks from the board tracks of his youth flattening their parabolic turns to allow passing. He put a bend in the front straightaway inspired by his days as a promoter. No fan sitting at either end of the main stretch would have to lean in front of another one to see the cars. And he had a particular length in mind, 2.5 miles.
I believe the day it was thrown out of the Indianapolis Speedway by Harry McQuinn was the genesis of the Daytona International Speedway. The rivalry between NASCAR and the AA was flaming at that point. And when Harry McQuinn, a former driver who was the chief steward of the Indianapolis 500, found out that Bill France was in the garage area, he sent a couple of guards to escort him out of the garage area. And now, there is no more AA. And the Daytona International Speedway is the cradle of American stock car racing.
Without financing in place, work began in earnest. No job was too big or too small for the France family to undertake personally.
I was living in North Carolina at the time, and I came down when we started construction in December. Went 7 days a week till the track was ready. I did a little bit of everything. I picked up the roots that were left there, you know, that you had to go by and rake up before you didn't want them buried in the soil and have them rot.
I sold tickets. I did everything. We all did. It took everybody to get this together.
Dr. Monaco, who was a Speedway physician, told me that he would like to have a Protestant minister and a Catholic priest to stay in the little care center in the Speedway during the races. And then I told him I'd be glad to, and I met him out there, and he introduced me to Bill Jr., who was digging the ditches in the Speedway for all the restrooms. And he said, well, since you're going to do this, how about having a prayer?
It remains a mystery whether France's prayer request was for getting out of the trenches or that the construction would be completed successfully. 300,000 shares of stock were sold at $1 a share, raising enough money to build a conventional track, but not enough to build Bill France's dream. 3 months later, it wouldn't matter. The project was out of money. But France flew to Dallas to meet with oil millionaire Clint Murchison.
The commitment for the loan and the personal loan from a fellow named Howard Slider, who worked for the Murchison family in Dallas. Howard came in with his personal check for $20,000, and that was coming up that Friday was going to be the last payroll. Bill Sr. was completely out of money, and then the Murchisons agreed for one of their insurance companies to extend the $600,000 loan, and that put them over the edge. It was that close, though.
1958, I was in Daytona. Over where Lake Lloyd is now was old Broomstraw Field, and they'd built an old wooden platform. And Bill France got up on the platform and says, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to know where you're now standing. Next year, Daytona International Speedway, the cars will run on. And everybody looked at it and said, you got to be out of your mind. Nowhere in the world they figured it could be done in a year. And God bless him, he built it in a year.
The 50 has been brought to you by Goodyear, #1 in tires. By the all-new Wide Track Grand Prix by Pontiac, wider is better. And by Brewery Fresh Budweiser, the king of beers. Hey, race fans, this Bud's for you.
I remember Bill as a man of great conviction. He was dedicated. Early on, he was involved, of course, Daytona being his central theme, you might say. I first met him way back in the 70s sometime, and I was impressed with his dedication to the sport. And I respect him. In fact, I love the guy.
In the pre-dawn light, Bill France's creation is still intimidating, whose fearsome contours must give even the most intrepid competitor pause.
Well, I'll tell you, the first time we went in down there, we went in under the tunnel and drove up to the tunnel and into the infield, and there was no buildings or anything. A few grandstands down the front strip, and it looked like that thing must have been 20 miles. I mean, you could not believe how big it was, because I guess we'd been to Darlington. I hadn't run at Darlington, but I'd seen Darlington. Everything else was a half-mile track, either dirt, sometimes you had some asphalt. So it was just super humongous.
Even in the eyes of a king, Bill Francis' kingdom was imposing. And as Petty would find success at Daytona, the NASCAR organization would continue to grow as Francis' influence and strong will was felt by everyone he came in contact with.
Bill told me, he said, I don't want a yes man. He said, I want somebody that'll work with us and tell us if they think we're doing something wrong, and we'll discuss things, bring us things. He says, but I'll always have a final say. And that's the way it's always been.
He was the type of an individual that immediately commanded a lot of respect. When you met him, you knew that he was a leader. You could just tell that just by talking to him, that he was a leader. And that certainly was the case as far as I was concerned, that I built an immediate respect for him. Now, over the years, I didn't always agree with everything that he did and said, but I always had respect for him because he had the best thing going as far as racing was concerned, and he always seemed to have such a vision for the sport.
And his vision didn't stop with the construction of Daytona. He still had another track to build that was even bigger.
As we approached Talladega, the old airport, he said, look down there. And he pointed down, and all I saw was a runway and pine trees, and he described the speedway in detail. And I looked at it, and that was the difference. He saw a speedway, and I saw pine trees.
Of hesitation lie the countless bones of millions who, in the grasp of victory, sat and waited, died. So, moral of that story is, you got an idea, go do it. Don't sit there and ponder on it forever.